John, let's start by setting some perspective because you have seen a lot of technology disruption. You've seen a lot of these waves. We seem to be not peaking in AI hype. It just seems to keep going. Maybe we've had some mini peaks, but as far as I can tell, we go down that trough of disillusionment, but we seem to, come right back up and re-peak. This week it's Grok 3. Is this the real deal? Like, or are we just caught in this sort of hype cycle and we're all going to be disappointed in 5 years?
Well, yeah, Greg, thanks so much for inviting me. And it's been a joy to work with your team to get ready for this session. So I'm excited to be here. Yeah, we're in a crazy hype cycle right now. I'm not so sure that we're going to crash, through the trough of disillusionment and end up, unhappy about it. I do think that there's a lot of people trying to sell us things that will never come to be. But the value of the recent wave, generative AI, has been substantial and will continue to be substantial. If you look back at foundational AI over the last 70 years, we've seen at least 3 AI winters, and we're done with that. So, all these people that are in the press and the pontificators and the pundits and the gurus and all those people saying, we're headed for another AI winter, that's not happening. The horses out of the barn, whatever metaphor you want to use, AI is here to stay. I've had some conversations with people around the world, executives, business managers, academics, administrators, and they ask me some different forms of this question is when are we going to be done? Or when is this AI thing going to pass? And the answer is never. This is the world we live in now. This is AI from here forward. So, don't sit around and think that this is going to pass, because it's not.
So if it's not passing though, but John, I presume it'll change though, meaning right now it's sort of a thing, like the internet used to be a thing, or e-commerce was a thing. And is it, so it's not going to pass? Is it likely to kind of recede from view, meaning be more embedded and be more sort of, silent everywhere, but not as noticeable? Is that sort of the path we're on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure, Greg, you live out in the Bay Area, right? You live out in California.
Yeah.
Perhaps John Seeley Brown?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, John and I were at a cocktail party about 20 years ago, and he was standing off to the side all by himself, and I thought, no one's talking to this guy. I can't believe it. So, I went out and sidled up next to him and started prattling on about my, enthusiasm for everything data and AI and analytics. And after, I'd calmed down a little bit, he imparted some wisdom to me, and he said, look, all the things you're building and everything that's being built is great, but until it recedes in the background like electricity, it's not going to be truly valuable. And that's where AI is going. AI is going to be, part of every system. Remember that old, marketing campaign, Intel Inside? That's what it's going to be. It's going to be AI inside everything. So yeah, the hype will recede, the value will increase, and the visibility will pass away.
All right. So you stated very confidently it's not going away. So that would presume that there is a business case for it. So you must have as much conviction about the ROI of AI as you do about the sort of the technologies of it. So where does that conviction?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive in there, then we'll zoom back out. This is how I like to run these things. We'll kind of go, zoom in, zoom out. So I'm not going according to plan. So because you opened the door and I want to go there, which is okay. You have that level of conviction. You must have that level of conviction that the numbers are going to pencil out. Because I assume the enterprise is going to be the one footing the bill, right? Consumers won't pay that much. We'll pay a little bit, right, for AI, but it feels like all the money is going to be enterprise. So why do you have such conviction about the ROI?
Well, I've worked in 20 different industries. I've been on teams that have put in over 100 predictive analytic applications into production. And every one of those applications has driven ROI that has been 10x, 50x, 100x of the investment. So, just the work that I've done as an individual and the teams that I've been on have proven that AI is a value driver, and we did one where we actually were helping understand scheduling people through 350 different locations in the United States. We were looking at their behavior, their demographics, their motivations, different things of that nature. and it was in COVID. So it was a real problem. You know, we started out with about 1 million people going through these locations. And about 12 months later, we were down to about 500,000. And these were the people that were producing the raw material for this organization. So we had come up with an AI-driven strategy, and we went and convinced the management that they should undertake this strategy. And I think 13 to 15 months later, we were at 1.5 million donors or something, or 5 million people or something like that. So not only had we recovered all the people we lost, we actually added another 50% on top of that. So those are the kinds of benefits and use cases and applications and ROI we're going to see over and over and over again. You heard David Solomon at the World Economic Forum saying that Goldman Sachs no longer uses people to produce prospectuses for investment banking. 95% of that work is done by Gen AI now. That's going to be use cases. That's going to be use case after use case after use case.
Because that was a sort of a predictive AI example you gave. And I was about to say, well, listen, are you that confident about generative AI? Because some of these generative AI use cases seem a little, flimsy, not flimsy, but, slim or, superficial. But and is that a superficial use case that humans aren't creating prospectuses for IPOs or roadshows or for, banking? I guess it's not that superficial because it probably employs lots of people.
Yeah.
So you have that conviction about generative AI across this wide range of knowledge tasks that we're going to get that level of efficiency and therefore economic gain.
I do think it is true. You're right. That first application or first example was a predictive analytic applications, and the second one was a Gen AI. And the great thing about generative AI is that it's opened up the world's information. Prior to Gen AI, we were using about 10% of the world's information, structured information, and we were probably downsampling that to 1%. So we were using 1% of the world's information. Now with Gen AI, we're using probably 100, maybe 100 plus if you think about synthetic data. So if you really step back and think about what have we done over the last 40 years, last 50 years in good structured information management principles. And if you apply that information management and data management to Gen AI, you deepen and enrich and broaden the use cases. Right now, we're just barely scratching the surface. If you go talk to, Goldman Sachs and EY and all these different companies, like you said, these use cases are kind of thin, but you can see how to broaden them, deepen them, and make them more valuable over time.
Yeah, John, I love that the way that sort of framework you've set up is the idea that we were really only accessing 10% of our data using that kind of previous generation AI, and that this really does open up on the data side the aperture to 100% or more. So that's a great kind of mental model, I guess. So you mentioned EY, so let's talk about EY right now because you're heading a team. I think your team is about 300 people. The rest of us don't have AI teams that big, but it's probably not that big when you think about how big EY is in terms of employees. So just tell us about your team a little bit in the last couple of years, what you've been focused on, and sort of what are the results so far. And then John, let's try to apply that to the rest of us, right? Because we work likely in smaller organizations with less resources, in slower industries, where the change is going to be harder to maybe push. But let's start with learning what you learned from at EY.
Sure. I've been at EY for just over 2 years now. I came in, my title is Global Head of AI, which is a grand title. Wouldn't we all want to have that? And I have just under 400 people that work for me because the general executive, the 10 people that run EY, were very concerned that Gen AI was taking over the world and that EY might not be partaking in that activity. So they brought me up and said, hey, let's have a conversation about this. So we did, and I presented what I thought was a decent idea. And they said, yeah, go do it. So what we ended up doing is, and I have to be careful here, at the time when we built it 13, 14 months ago, it was considered one of the world's largest Gen AI environments. Probably still is, but I haven't measured it, so I don't really know. We have 300,000 people hitting this system on a daily basis. And we set it up in a way that it's foolproof and it's scalable. So those 300,000 people can put anything into it. Now, when we did this and we released it, I got hundreds, if not thousands of emails and requests from people around EY. There are 420,000 people in EY. So you might say, well, why doesn't the other 120,000 people use that system? That's because of export restrictions. They're in China, North Korea, and Iran, Iraq, and Russia, and places like that. So they can't use this technology. But they're in there hitting it. And the reason people were reaching out to me in such numbers was that we said you could put anything into this. And that's not normal for most highly regulated industries, conservative companies. You know, our taxonomy is C1 data, which is the internet, all the way up to C2, C3, C4, which is highly confidential and private information. All of that can be put in our environment because it's all secure, it's all private, and none of the information is persistent. So,
and John, when you say it, what is it? It's an LLM, multiple LLMs? Like what's it? What does everybody get their hands on every day in terms of the off-the-shelf AI?
Yeah, it's a system called EYQ. So if you know James Bond and the Q character, it's after that the quartermaster. So it allows you all the different tools that are out there. So the system itself is a model-based environment that's global. There's multiple instances around the world, and wherever you are in the world, you hit a different instance. And what it allows you to do is go in and insert a prompt and get a response. Now we have prompt engineering, we have prompt management, we have an orchestration system, we have a marketplace. There are many parts of this system, but at the core of it, it's a Gen AI environment that allows you to put in anything you want and get the responses back you require.
Are you getting the level of adoptions that you wanted or hoped for? Because that's not our experience at Section, and our experience or our opinion, I guess, is informed by two sources of data, essentially talking to clients, our current clients, our large enterprise clients, and then we do a survey every 6 months of 5,000 knowledge workers, US, Canada, UK. We did it in September, we're doing it again in March. And in that survey, what we hear is a lot of anxiety and resistance to AI, and kind of not the levels of enterprise adoption that maybe some companies were hoping for. You seem to have been able to get high levels of adoption, and therefore, how did you push through the levels of anxiety or resistance that maybe other organizations are suffering from?
Well, you know, that's a great question. Thanks, Greg. One of the things that we did was that, as I said, EY is a large, multinational, highly conservative, many places, you know, regulated by many bodies. And the employees in EY really want to do the right thing and want to be compliant with all the rules and regulations that are required of them. So I spent a lot of time with InfoSec, legal, data privacy, and the risk management departments. And I said, look, draw me a picture, draw the bright lines. Where can I get outside of? Where do I have to stay inside for this system? And it was very easy for them to elucidate all the restrictions or regulations and things that we had to stay within. So then we drew inside that box and we said, okay, this system complies with all these constraints. And then we said to the end users, the potential users in EY, you don't have to worry about any of that because we've taken care of it. You cannot make a mistake using this system. It is foolproof. You could put anything into it. So as soon as we did that, it went through the roof. So we measured it.
Okay, but why did it go through? Okay, I'm not doubting you, but it went through the roof. That's not what we're seeing in other organizations. So I just want to really focus there, because you got the rules and the guidelines, and I love what you did. Like, hey, you're not going to get fired for using this. A lot of companies are not doing that and need to. But we talk at Section a lot about that's not enough. You also need to sort of have a culture of AI, right? One is, okay, here are the rules. The other is, you know, how do we talk about AI in the organization? How do we change the way we work? We have a lot of, as you know, values, particularly in the United States, about work. Like, don't cut corners, right? Working hard is a virtue. Don't cheat. You know, we accuse high school kids of cheating when they use AI, or maybe, you know, even at University of Michigan, I don't know, right? So, like, how did you break through some of that resistance?
Well, there was a great thirst, you know, to understand AI, and there was a great interest in being able to use it, not only for internal applications, but to be able to talk externally about their experiences, each employee's and partner's experience in understanding Gen AI. And another thing that we did was that we architected the environment in a way that anytime a new model came out that we were interested in, we could have that new model from the time that it was released out to the entire population of people within 2 weeks. So we were keeping the model on the leading edge all the time. New model came out, we put it in. New model came out, we put it in. New model came out, we put it in. So people were learning from, let's use the OpenAI family because we can't talk about all of them. It'll just take too long, it'd be too cumbersome. But it went from 3 to 3.5 to 4 to 1 to 3. And we just kept leapfrogging forward with those models. So people could say, oh, well, I used to do this on 4 and now I'm using 01. And that is a great benefit to a company like EY. You have to remember, we're tax, audit, consulting, financial services, and mergers and acquisitions. Much of our value is being able to be knowledgeable about the leading edge of these technologies and the intersections of these service offerings. So we were allowing people to upgrade their skills and engage in a safe space to learn by themselves so they could then represent to their knowledge to the market.
Got it. Okay, listen, you're not a section client yet, but how did you train everybody? I mean, 300,000 people, and this has been going on only 18 months. I mean, these are huge numbers in a pretty compressed time frame. It was yeah. What was the training plan? Just at a high level, like go watch a video, or just go play with it, or what?
Well, the initial was go play with it. Because it's a conversational user interface. It's a box. If you can type a sentence, you can do a prompt. So there was that. That's how we started out. And then there are teams of people around the world that are doing curricula, prompt management curricula, legal, understanding legal and contracts and audit and tax and things like that. So I've seen one measurement inside EY that the basic Gen AI class has been taken by 80% of the people around the world. So, we're generating content, generating classes. One of the first things I did when I came into EY, I think it was in the first month I was here, they gave me a curriculum and said, here's all the things we want to train people on. And I just went through it with a bright red pen and said, no, 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 no. I think I cut out about 60% of the classes and added in a whole bunch new and said, this stuff is old. No one cares about it. This is where we need to go.
So you focus on relevance and kind of real timeness, I guess, in terms of the training.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Let's move to ROI. Pretty phenomenal accomplishment as far as I can tell. 300,000 people actively using, the internal EYQ. Love that. So, I had Bryce Chalamal in one of these conversations where Bryce said, listen, no one asks for the ROI of what the ROI of a computer is, and we give laptops to everybody. That's one way to approach it. Some CFOs might take that as an okay answer, but I think a lot aren't, right? What's your take on, what's your point of view on it? What was the CFO's point of view on it at EY? And more, again, how should we think about it if we're trying to build business cases? I'd say beyond the $10,000 I bought GPT teams, when the numbers get to be more like 6 figures and above, right? That's real money for a small, small mid-sized, right? Like, what's your mindset on the ROI conversation?
It's multifaceted for sure. And, the way we did it is that we knew that we could build EYQ fast and scalable and in an inexpensive way. So when we look at co-pilots and other Gen AI augmented tools and offerings for employees, we're seeing that EYQ is about 10x less than those other tools, and that's the bottom. And in some cases, it's 20, 30, 40 times more expensive than what we've built. It really comes down to, what is your team doing? Is your team mostly doing office productivity and you want them to do a better job of writing? Well, then maybe Copilot is the way for you to go. Is it something like we've got where we wanted to, we've talked about a lot of benefit, but one of the other things we wanted to do was build a foundation, build a platform for these 300,000 people. And then we wanted to unleash distributed innovation. We've had hundreds of applications built, which we used to call skills, and now we're going to be calling agents soon. So you have to look at it from that perspective too. You know, you've built a foundation, you've built a platform. Now you're going to open it up to, you know, distributed innovation, and then it, you know, becomes very interesting. So the use cases that I've seen, you know, in doing proposals, we have one called Deal and Delivery Assist. We have another one that helps expats understand their tax liability, as you would expect with a, you know, a large tax practice like we have. We've got, you know, about 50 or 60 others that have gone into production. So each one of those is showing productivity gains, showing the ability to use information in new ways, and showing, you know, how our employees can actually engage and be much more nimble in their operations. So the real question in my mind around ROI is, you can do some simple ROI calculations. You could put things on the screen that, you know, your CFO may nod at, but really, what's the value realization? You know, what are the productivity metrics? Those usually don't come out for like a year or a year and a half or 2 years after you've got these things adopted and are being used. So ROI, I always do it. I always put it together. I didn't have to at AI or at EY just because the need was so urgent, but I have in all the past, and everything that I've built in foundational AI and generative AI and soon in causal AI, you always denominate in whatever currency the managers are interested in: euros, yen, dollars, whatever it happens to be. And we're always showing that the most conservative numbers, of course, that, you know, this is going to return a good amount of money on what you're investing in. So I think ROI is required in most organizations, but you know, there's a lot of different facets to it.
So let's just build out that stack real quick, and we'll kind of use that to summarize this part of the conversation, which is, it feels like to me what you're saying is there's sort of a broad-based deployment and adoption of LLM-like technologies, you know, one or multiple. It feels like there's a overall productivity lift for the workforce that can engage and use those tools on a day-to-day basis, and that might be everything from summarizing emails or reports. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm not asking about EY data. I'm just asking you as someone who's seen this movie before. If I'm a CEO and I have to write that check or approve that, which is this LLM for everybody, am I looking at a 5 or 10 or 15% productivity lift if I have a typical knowledge workforce in a year or two? Does that feel like what it is? Is it more? Is it in that range?
I'd say it's somewhere between 10 and 20.
Okay, great. And then on top of that, we're going to build these specialized apps. And I love the way you talked about it, meaning enable everybody to figure this out, and they'll start building their own, you know, like what kind of the ecosystem, meaning internally we'll find these use cases, higher value use cases, and we'll kind of prototype, probably experiment, maybe even build their own, or come to your team and say, hey, I need help to build this, and we can make it available to others. Those seem like more effort, you know, more cost, but have likely better ROI, right? Because they're going to be more focused on specific use cases or workflows. Is that like if I spend $1 million, I should get 5 back? What is your kind of, you know, ROI expectation of something that's a little more purpose built, or maybe even purpose bought? You went outside and bought something.
We've seen similar to what David Solomon was saying in the prospectus conversation in generating proposals.
Right.
You know, we built this deal and delivery assist skill, and it usually takes multiple employees, multiple months to generate a proposal. Now we've built this deal and delivery assist. Someone answers, you know, 5 to 10 questions. They put in a prompt with a little bit more language, hit a button. 4 minutes later, they have a proposal. Now that's not apples to apples. You know, you still have to work out the pricing. You still have to edit it. You have to make sure there's no hallucinations in there and all that kind of stuff. But you've probably cut, you know, 2.5 months worth of work and 4 or 5 people out of the equation. So, you know, that's a pretty significant lift in productivity.
Yep. Okay, is the last top of the stack like bigger transformative applications? You know, not maybe, you know, deal assist, whatever it's called, is real, but is there like, should we all as leaders be thinking about, are there 1 or 2 things that might be those real big rocks that if we can move them, you know, we'll get that 10, 100x kind of ROI, you know, to kind of transform the, you know, the slope of the business. Will. Should we be looking for those yet, or should we be more focused on the first 2 layers of this stack and kind of, you know, wait for the transformative stuff, like, or pursue all 3 at once? So, like, so how do you think about sort of sequencing here of our investment? You know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Greg. And I'm glad you put it that way, because when I talk to, people out there, executive students, middle managers, whoever I happen to be in front of at the time, and they do ask me questions like that, and you can tell they're focused on what's happened in the last 2 years, the last 2.5 years, the prompt and response kind of operation of a model. They're not really thinking of the process engagement or the agent or the agentic workflows that are going to come. So good to focus on those areas because you can build those out. Like we said, you can have simple ones and you can, deepen them and broaden them and make them more industrial strength. But really, whereas you have said, the 100x, the 200x, that kind of return is going to come from the agentic workflows. We already see the return, we see the productivity lift, but we don't see the complex workflows. But we've already done that in my lab. I'm lucky enough to have a small team of very bright people who do applied AI research. And all the different crazy ideas I come up with, I give to them. And they've already built a number of these very complicated workflows that go in and you have a model that does this, and you have a different model that's been trained on this. We can talk about domain language models and small language models, specific models for very specific domains. And we have looked at transforming complete workflows from end to end. That's where we're going to see much more value being derived. The simple prompt and response, that's great and it's fun. And, it's almost akin to pulling a rabbit out of the hat, really. But, we're going to see much more value in the next 2 years rather than what we've seen in the past.
So now you've stepped into the hype zone for sure, because you've just the agent conversation. Okay, so first of all, you think that's where we're going to see these kind of transformative productivity gains, essentially cutting steps and people out of workflows, right? And stitching together AIs. Is that a source of some of this resistance? Let's go in a little more uncomfortable territory right now. Because my sense is a lot of employees think about it this way, which is you're asking me to use AI so I can train my replacement. This reminds me of a client hired me to go speak at their offsite all hands, all company meeting. And it was like, Greg, we want you to cover all these things. Just don't scare anybody about job loss. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not sure that's frankly intellectually honest, and so a couple questions here. Or maybe just one. How as leaders should we be talking about this, particularly when we talk about agents? Because I think when you see agents, you see complete workflows, getting handled by the machine, right? Coach us on how to have this conversation with our organization around, we want our organization to embrace AI, and how we're going to do that together and handle what happens next.
If you look at the research from the World Economic Forum, Bank of America, Gartner, it's been going on for at least 4 years now. It shows that AI, Gen AI, foundational AI, causal AI are all net job creators. So we are going to, there's a lot of conversation about AI replacing jobs, and I honestly don't think that's really a concern. I think the jobs will be there. I think there will be more jobs. You started out this conversation about wanting to have older people on the call, and here we are. That's a concern for people in our age bracket. I mean, this demographic in the workforce are the people that should be the most concerned about it. Because generally they're, less interested in retraining, they're less flexible, they're closer to the end than they are the beginning, but if you look at the rest of the workforce, people just coming out of college or people that have been in for 3 to 5 years or 7 to 10 years, or maybe even up to 12 or 15, those people have a chance to do different types of jobs and do jobs that are more fulfilling and interesting. So I don't see the entire job population being at risk. I see older workers being at risk. And what those people need to do is work on retraining and reskilling and, being, open to using AI or working with AI as an augmented tool. So I don't worry about it as much because I don't think that's a real problem. I think the job creation is going to outgrow the job loss. But I do hear what you're saying, and I do have a couple stories where we've talked about retraining people, but I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate that. Listen, to be honest, your opinion carries more weight with me than a Goldman Sachs forecast, quite frankly, because you've seen it before. You're in the middle of it now. I take you at your word, meaning if your intuition, your sense is like, we're not going to see that kind of job loss. I think that's good news. I worry about it. Maybe it's because I'm Canadian. I don't know, and or that the transitions can be hard. As Reid Hoffman said to me, we're not good at transitions. Which if you're the one being laid off, that's kind of the understatement of the world, right? Like these moments. These moments can be tough. And what would your advice be across any age range, maybe even your kids? Like, how are you counseling your kids in terms of how they should think about AI and how it might impact them or not? Like what's your go-to advice for a college grad?
Well, since I am teaching at the University of Michigan, I'm talking to undergraduates and graduates and people who are going to be graduating soon. And what I say to them is that, we've been working on technology for as long as we've been alive, and even more than that, really. So when I came into the workforce, I was an assembler programmer. Most people don't even know what that is. And that was writing code that was just one level above the machine. So, it was hard. It was not easy to write assembler code. So it's a difficult thing to do. And here we are nearly 40 years later with a conversational user interface. So I tell people the barrier to getting engaged with this technology is nil. You can go out and find free models. You can type it in whatever language you want, Nepalese, Hindi, Urdu, English, French, British English even. I'm sorry, joking.
French Canadian, even French Canadian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
French
exactly.
Canadian even. But, I tell people, get in the game, just start it out, take your resume and ingest it in there and ask questions about yourself, make it fun. I was going through an online course with one of the online providers. I'm not going to do a pitch for them, but I was sitting there playing around and I added in my first book, I added in my second book, I added in my resume, I added in a white paper, I added in this, I added in that. And that was just putting it in the context window. That wasn't fine tuning or, building a RAG or any of that kind of stuff. But the more I put in, the better it got. And it was kind of fun. I was having a conversation about, myself, and it was coming up with different postulations and ideas. So I tell people, it's like, look, just play with it. You can't make mistakes. You can't break it. It's not going to do anything to you. And as soon as the session's over, all that information evaporates anyway. So just try it.
Yeah, listen, and by the way, I love that subtle flex. I loaded in my books into my AI. So for the rest, and I know you have another book coming out. So you obviously like to write, or you're able to endure the process, or you're able to survive the process. So we should make sure we talk about that book before we wrap up. I think it's coming out soon. I have a theory of what's going to go down here. I'd like to hear yours, though. My theory is that there will be one or two winners, and of sort of what I would consider, general purpose AI or frontier model or foundational model, and that this is the race to build the most valuable company in the world, because it will be the company that essentially we cognitively offload to that company, right? As a workforce or even as a species. If you think about how the next 10 years could unfold. So, we have Google that understands our intention and serves our intention. Meta serves our attention, Meta and TikTok, let's say Amazon, our consumption, Apple, our communication, and so on. And who's going to own or serve our cognition requirements, right? Our ability to work with this co-intelligence. So I think that's the race to build the most valuable company in the world. And there will be one or two, a small number of winners, and there will be massively influential and valuable companies. I have concerns about that, as I'm sure any of us would, in terms of, is that a good thing, that concentration of economic power and influence? Would you agree, or there's another school of thought? Scott Galloway, our founder, wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, around maybe this will be like the airline business, where the public utility is high, but the business model sucks. For the frontier models. Curious what you think.
It's an interesting conversation. I don't think is as important as you're making it out to be. I think that there will be, I don't know, 6 to 8 large language models that are out there and competing. Google will have one, AWS will have one, Microsoft will have one. It's a big company game. You know, I think they used to say these things are the sport of kings. So there's no doubt about that, you know, and there will be lots of information poured into these models, and, you know, it'll be no more dangerous than AWS or Google is with all the data they have now. The thing that I don't get too exercised about it is that these models are just one part of the ecosystem. You know, as we go forward, we mentioned it earlier about domain language models and small language models, and then the NLP models that we worked with for the last 10 years. I think I'm calling them tiny language models. It's an ecosystem. So, you know, you're going to use large language models, but they're going to be less and less important. You're going to be building your own domain language models and small language models and tiny language models. And when you go into an environment, you will be using multiple models. You know, people will say, oh, I'm using the model. Well, that's not really true. It's probably not even true for most people today. You're going to be using many models. And what you're going to do is you're going to be sending in your information. Could be a prompt, could be many prompts, could be context, could be lots of different things. It's going to go to a model, which is an orchestrator. That's going to decompose that prompt and send it to many different models. The results are going to come back. That model's going to reassemble it and give it to you. So this idea that the LLMs are the Uber models, the models that govern all models, that's not true.
Okay, John's not buying my theory. All right, I need to do a better. I need to do a better job at pitching it. I like it. I like this idea that I guess my theory. Anyway, okay, let's go. You're writing a book. It's called On the Path to AGI. So why and where is this path going, and how soon?
The book is called The Path to AGI. It comes out March 10th, I believe, is the projected publishing date on Amazon. And the idea was that I hear, you know, many people talking that AGI is here now. We have AGI. We'll have AGI in a year. And most of the people that are talking about this are raising money. So, you know, there's an inherent conflict of interest in that dynamic right there. So I've looked at it very carefully. You know, I've looked at foundational AI, generative AI, causal AI, composite AI in the future. And my view is that it's going to be 2250 before we see AGI. So 125 years from now is when we will have it. So 8 generations of us will be gone, come and gone before we see AGI. So I wanted to put a book out there that is practical, pragmatic, and illustrates how hard this really is.
Okay, if there are any OpenAI investors on this Zoom, sorry to, you know, rain on your parade, but Sam's AGI timeline looks a little off, according to John Thompson. All right.
Way off.
Way off. Okay. Thank you, John, for joining us today. And yes, it feels like we ran out of time, and we'll maybe circle back sometime and try to get you in for part 2.